In this video, I want to focus on the SumIf function, the SumIfs function or SumIfs function, as well as the CountIf function and the CountIfs function. So most of you are familiar with the sum function. If you type in equal sum, and then if you highlight this column, you're going to get the total sum for that column. Well, let's say if we don't want to find the sum of this entire column, but we only want to find the sum of just the red marbles. In this case, you could use the SumIf function. So let's type in marbles here, and then the result for the SumIf function. Now, to use the SumIf function, well, first let's highlight these cells. So let's change the background color. I'm going to make this light gray, and this one, let's make it yellow. So this is where our results are going to show up. Now, to use the SumIf function, type in equal SumIf parentheses. Now, the first thing that we need to select is the range. So the range is these text values, and then comma. The next thing is the criteria. So the criteria that we're going to look at is whatever is inside cell A14. Next, we need to fill in the sum range. So these are the numbers that we're going to be added. So the numbers that we're going to look at are the numbers in this column. So those are the numbers that we're going to find a partial sum of. Now, let's say if we type in red in this cell, it's going to give us the sum of all of the red marbles in that list. So notice that we have 70 red marbles in row 2. Hit Control, and then we can highlight the other red marbles in row 5 and row 9. So let's add up those three numbers. So equal sum 70 plus 85 plus 218. And so that will give us the same answer of 373. So the SumIf function allows us to sum up just one type of element in that entire list. So if you want to find the sum of, let's say, all of the blue marbles, just type in blue and it will automatically update the answer. Now, it might be useful to create a drop-down list instead of having to type the different types of marbles. So if you click data and then go to data validation, and then under the section where it says allow, select list, whoops, and then you can just type in the different types of marbles that you see. So we have red, we have blue, yellow, and green. So those are the 4 different types of marbles that we have. So now we have a drop-down list. So if we select yellow, it's going to change. So there's a total of 569 yellow marbles in this list. If we select green, there's a total of 115. As we can see here, there's only one count for the green marbles in this list. Or if we select the red, 373. Now let's move on to the right side. So notice that instead of having one criteria, we have 2. In this case, the card type and the color of that particular card type. So in this example, we're going to illustrate how to use the SumIfs function or the SumIfs function. So in the first option, we're going to select the card type, and in the second option, we're going to select the color of the vehicle, and then here we're going to get the total amount using the SumIfs function. So let's highlight these cells with a gray color. Whoops, let's change that to that. And let's go back here and make our total yellow. So how can we use the SumIfs function? So this one's a little bit more complicated, but it's not too difficult. If you type in equal SumIfs parentheses, notice that you have the sum range. So this is the column with the numbers that you wish to add. It's a little different than the SumIf function because that was like the last option to do, or the last option to select. After you select that range, press comma. Now criteria range 1. So this is a range. Therefore, the first criteria is the card type. That's what we're going to select. Next, we just have criteria 1. So this is not a range. This is a cell that we're going to select. And so the cell that we're going to look at for criteria 1 or the card type will be here. And then press comma, criteria range 2. So this is a range of values for the second option, which will be here. And then criteria 2, this is not a range. So this is the cell that we're going to look at, which will be here. And then if you want, let's say, a third column to look at, you can continue the pattern. Now let's close the parentheses because we're going to stop here. So now let's see how many Hyundai vehicles that we have that has a silver color. So we can see that it's only 130. But now let's see how many Honda vehicles that are, let's say, black. So out of all the Honda vehicles, notice that we have 95 that are black and also 156. So if you sum 95 and 156, you'll get 251. And so as you can see, the SumIfs function allows us to sum the elements in this column given or based on selecting 2 criteria as opposed to just 1 criteria or just 1 option. So if you want to sum up certain elements in a range using 2, 3, or 4 different criteria, you could use the SumIfs function. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a dependent drop-down list. So we want the second list to be dependent on the first one. So if we select Honda in the card type of the first list, then the only options that will appear for the second drop-down list should be black or blue. So if we select Toyota for the card type in our first drop-down list, then once we highlight the second drop-down list, the only colors that we want to see are brown and orange. So to the right, let's create a list here. So this would be the card type, and there's only 4 different card types that we have: Hyundai, Honda, Toyota, and Mazda. Now, for all of the Hyundai vehicles, there's 2 colors that we have in this list: silver and white. So let's go ahead and type that here. Next, we have Honda, and we only have a black Honda and a blue Honda. Next is Toyota, and for that we only have brown and orange. Finally, the last one is the Mazda vehicle, and the color for Mazda is black or blue. Now what we need to do next is we need to name these different ranges. So for car type, those 4 options, let's call it car, or just car type. Okay, let's avoid putting a space, so let's just type in car. Now for the next one, let's type in Hyundai, and then the next 2, black and blue, let's call it Honda, and then for these 2 options, we'll call it Toyota at the top left, and then these 2, let's call it Mazda. So now that we have a name for each of those options, let's go back here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Data, Data Validation. Just like before, let's choose the list option. And then for the source, you can either type in the names that you have, or we can click that button and highlight everything that's here, and then press enter, and then OK. So we have this drop down box. Now for the second list, which depends on the first list, what you want to do is you want to go to data validation again. Choose a list. This time type in equal indirect parentheses and then highlight this cell, close parentheses, and then click OK. So now we can select a car type and a color. So let's select Toyota, and then notice that for the second drop down list we only have brown or orange. So let's choose orange. And so we get 29, which we have here. Now let's select Mazda as the car type, and let's choose the blue Mazda. So we have two options where we have a blue Mazda vehicle. And so we're going to get the sum total of 170 plus 234, which is 404. And so now we can combine the SumIfs function with a multiple dependent drop-down list. So let's choose another car type. Let's say if we want to choose Honda, and we do have a blue Honda, and so we get 124, but let's change it to black. So for the black Honda, we have 95 and 156, so that adds up to 251. And so now you know how to use the SumIfs function. So if you're trying to add elements in this column based on selecting two criteria as opposed to just one option. Now what about the CountIf function and the CountIfs function? How can we use that? So here I have a new list, and let's talk about how to use the count function. If I type in equal count, this tells you how many cells contains a number. And so there I have a list of 19 cells that possess a number. You can't really use the count function with cells that contain letters or words. In this case, it doesn't help us, but we could use the CountIf function to count how many marbles that are red or blue or green. So let me illustrate that. So here we're going to type in the color, and then this would be the value produced by the CountIf function. So let's say if the color that we want to count is red. Here let's type in equal CountIf. Now we need to select the range. So we're going to look at all the different types of marbles that we have. Press comma, and the criteria is whatever is in cell A23, and then close parentheses. So we have 4 marbles that are red. Now we don't need this column anymore, so let's delete that. Here's the first one, here's the second, here's the third, and here's the fourth. So we have 4 red marbles. Now if we want to change it to, let's say, yellow, there's 5 yellow marbles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as you can see, the CountIf function can help you to count certain words in a column. In this case, you can count how many red marbles we have, how many green marbles we have, and so forth. So let's change the color on this one just like we did before. And let's change the background color of that cell. Let's make it gray, and let's turn it into a drop-down list. So let's click Data, Data Validation, Lists, and we can type in the different colors that we have. So red, blue, green, and yellow. So now let's say if we want to see how many blue marbles there are. There's a total of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now let's select green. So we have a total of 4 green marbles. And we have 4 red marbles. And so that's it for the CountIf function. That's how you can use it in Excel. Now let's talk about how to use the CountIfs function for the second column. So here we're going to have the information for the car type of our vehicle, the color, and I'm going to use two things, the CountIf and the CountIfs function for this information. So these two, let's highlight it gray, and then for these two, let's choose yellow again, just for consistency. So to use the CountIf function, let's type in equal CountIf, and we only have one range that we're going to look at. That is the first range, and then comma, the criteria for that range will be based on whatever we type in cell D23. And so that's it for the CountIf function. Now for the CountIfs function, we have multiple ranges that we can look at. So criteria range 1 is the car type. Let's press comma, and then for criteria 1, we're going to look at cell D23, whatever it's in it, comma. Criteria range 2, let's highlight this range, comma, and then the cell that we're going to analyze is cell E23. And we don't have a third column, so let's stop here. Close parentheses, type enter. Okay, so let's say if we want to know how many Mazda vehicles that we have. Just type in the word Mazda, and we can see that we have a total of 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 Mazda vehicles. Now let's see what happens if we select a color. So let's choose blue. So now we have a value for the CountIfs function. So the first one tells us how many Mazda vehicles we have. That's 8. The second one tells us that we have 5 Mazda vehicles that are blue. So here's the first one, and then here is the second, the third, and where is the fourth one? Here it is, and this is the fifth one. So as you can see, we have 5 blue Mazda vehicles. Now let's delete this, and let's look into Honda. So we have 5 Honda vehicles, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now how many are green? So out of the 5 Honda vehicles, 4 of them are green. So here's the first one, and here is the second, third, and fourth. And so just to review, the count function helps us to count how many cells contain numbers. The CountIf function helps us to determine like how many marbles are red, or how many marbles are blue, or how many Mazda vehicles that we have. The CountIfs function with the S tells us how many blue Mazda vehicles we have, or how many green Honda vehicles we have. And so if you want to count something based on multiple criteria, use the CountIfs function. If you want to count something based on one single criteria, use the CountIf function. And of course, you know how to create a drop-down list for this if you want to.